Okay, good afternoon then, Year 7. So today we are going to be looking at Thomas Hardy's poem, The Man He Killed. So Thomas Hardy's poem, The Man He Killed. Now in this first video today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a bit of background to the poem, and it is one of the poems that could come up in your end of year exam. So the poems that could come up in that end of year exam are this one, Thomas Hardy, The Man He Killed, The Soldier by Rupert Brooke, which we've already looked at, Robert Graves' A Dead Bosh, which we also looked at. That was the first poem we looked at. And then finally, Wilfred Owen's Anthem for Doomed Youth, which will be our poem for next week. So there's 4 poems that could come up in that end of year exam, and this is one of them. So I will just give you some background to this poem then. So the first thing that you need to know is this was written in 1902. So it is not about World War I or World War II. This is a war poem, but it's about the Second Boer War, which took place in 1902. Okay? So, the first thing you need to know here is that Thomas Hardy, the poet, was strongly against this war. Now, the reason Thomas Hardy was strongly against this war was because the British were trying to defend their empire, something that he was very much against. So Hardy was against the idea of defending the empire. So the British Empire, of course, in the 19th century, Britain has control of many of the countries around the world, and this war was an attempt to make sure that the empire remained strong, that Britain was still a powerful force across the world, and Thomas Hardy was very much against this war. So that's the first thing you need to know, and that is going to be very important when we start to think about what this poem is about. So remember, we're going to decide what the poem is about. That first step is D, remember? So we're going to decide what the poem is about once we know a little bit more. So let's just have a look at the title of the poem as well, The Man He Killed. Now in some of the other poems we've looked at, so The Soldier, for example, or A Dead Bosh, those poems, well, particularly with The Soldier was about glorifying war and emphasising how patriotic the soldier feels, how proud they feel to fight for their country. However, the title of this poem shows no reference to the glory of war. It just describes war as men being killed, the man he killed. There's no glory to it, there's no excitement. It is simply about the senselessness of man killing fellow man. So that word senseless is going to be a very important one in understanding this poem. So what I mean by senseless is without sense, not making any sense. So the title of this poem showing no reference to the glory of war and really emphasising. So you can make these notes along with me in your poetry anthologies. So make these notes with me, emphasising the senselessness of man killing fellow man. So this poem is not about the glory of war, but about how war is senseless, how it doesn't make any sense for men to be fighting each other. So deciding what the poem's about, write this in with me. This poem is about how war is senseless. So not about the glory of war, as Rupert Brooke's poem The Soldier is. This is about the senselessness of war. Okay, so that is kind of an overview to the background of the poem. Let's get into then the language, form and structure used by Thomas Hardy. Now you remember that when you are writing about poetry, you need to write about writers' methods. And writers' methods, so that's what you pick out when you're analysing your quotes, fall into 3 categories. They are language, So that's, for example, similes, metaphors, imagery, personification, anything like that. So language is the first category. The second is form. We're going to talk about form in a moment. And the third is structure. So when you're talking about structure, you can talk about enjambment, which is when we let it flow across the line. Caesura, which is when you have that punctuation in the middle of the line. You can also talk about the length of the stanzas, what kind of stanzas we have, and also the line length too. So there's some of the things you can talk about with structure. So we've looked at language and structure before, but we haven't really talked a great deal about form. So let's just think about the form of this poem, and I'll give you an example of what form could be. Now, we have mentioned one type of form before, and that was Rupert Brooke's poem being a sonnet, which you remember was, we called it 14 Lines of Love, a 14-line poem expressing love for someone or something. So different types of form then. We can have the sonnet, which is the soldier, Rupert Brooke's poem, and we can also have a dramatic monologue. So this poem is written in the form of a dramatic monologue. So you can write that onto the poem. Now, a dramatic monologue is a poem in the form of a speech. So let's just write this definition down. You can do that with me. A poem in the form of a speech in which the speaker, so whoever is narrating the poem, reveals their thoughts and feelings. Now, it's important that we write about the form of the poem because it can shape the message of the poem as well. So if this is a dramatic monologue, and it is, if it's a poem in the form of a speech, and the speaker is going to reveal their thoughts and feelings, and we know that the poem is about how war is senseless, then we can work out that the speaker's thoughts and feelings are going to be about how war is senseless. That's what their thoughts and feelings are going to be showing in this poem. And once we understand that, then we can start to pick out the similes. Whoops. Let's go back. The similes, the repetition, the imagery, the caesura, so the language and the structure. We can start to pick out those writers' methods and understand how Thomas Hardy is using those to show us that war is senseless. So remember, any of these writers' methods, any language, form, or structure is always being used to link back to what Hardy is trying to tell us, and that is that war is senseless. Okay, so final thing we're going to do in this video then is there are a total of 3 writers' methods that we can pick out in this poem. So let's have a look then. So you guys need to go off and read the poem yourself in a moment, and I will upload onto Show My Homework a reading of the poem which you can listen to. But first of all, let's have a look at the third stanza. So the speaker says, I shot him dead because he was my foe. Just so, my foe, of course he was. So first of all, you'll notice here that we have some repetition. So we have a language feature here. So we have a repetition of the word foe. So remember, the first thing you need to do is name the technique. We're going to name it as repetition. You then need to explain the effect of that technique, which, remember, repetition, it's always to emphasize an idea. And then you need to link that effect back to what the speaker is trying to tell us. And here, the speaker is trying to emphasize, well, look back at what's being repeated. Foe. Remember, foe means enemy. So the speaker is trying to emphasize that the man he is fighting is the enemy. And then you just got to think, why might he be trying to do that? So how can we add another arrow? How can we add one more idea there? The speaker is trying to emphasize that the man he is fighting is the enemy because he wants to convince himself that he must continue fighting. So the speaker believes that war is senseless, that it doesn't make any sense. We shouldn't be fighting each other. However, he has to fight. He has to carry on being a soldier. So what he's doing here is he's repeating in his mind, trying to emphasize to himself, this guy is the enemy. I must carry on fighting him. So he's trying to convince himself to carry on fighting because he has to. He doesn't want to, because remember, he believes that war is senseless. It doesn't make any sense to fight. However, he knows he must. So we have a language technique there, some repetition. And remember, the steps are for annotating. First of all, decide what the poem's about. Number 1, you've done that. The war is senseless. Number 2, name the technique. Repetition. Done. Number 3, tell us the effect of that technique to emphasize an idea. And then number 4, link that effect to emphasize an idea. So you've linked it there back to what you said the poem was about, that war was senseless. Okay, I'm going to show you where the next 2 techniques are. However, I would like you to then annotate them using the 4 steps I've just shown you. So here, there is some caesura. Remember, that's punctuation in the middle of the line. And also in this first stanza, there is some imagery for you to find, particularly in that line there. So you guys now need to go off and follow the 4 steps to annotating there, but doing it please with imagery and caesura. I've shown you where they are. So remember, you need to explain the effects of those 2 techniques. So one of them is a language technique, imagery, and one of them is structure for caesura. And you need to follow those 4-step process to annotating. Remember, you can download from Show My Homework the PDF that I'm going to attach to that task, and that will explain what imagery is, what caesura is, what the effect of those techniques are. In there will also be some complex vocabulary for you to use, and there are some post-reading questions for you to answer once you have read through the poem. Okay, work hard and make sure that you check Show My Homework every day for the new tasks that I'm going to upload. Okay.